Welcome back to the real start of the age of nationalities, of nationalism, I should say. You know, there was in the 18th century and before national identity, but it really spreads, really becomes a deep rooted thing at this time. So, this, the Napoleonic era, the French Revolution, really spreads that nationalistic fervor around Europe, which then later spreads it more around the world. And I say that is because, a lot of Chinese citizens just sort of knew the world because the world was all China. The Chinese citizen knew. He didn't think in terms. I mean, obviously there's some, god awful foreigners somewhere out in the world way far away, but it was just his sort of community. And that, in a slightly different scope, is sort of what Europe was. And as time goes on, and definitely we see a lot of, I would push back a few hundred years earlier for Scottish national identity starting to show up. But you see a lot of this. Things were a lot more local and regional and not so nationalistic identities until the French Revolution really gets, in deep. Now, let's continue the battle. Oh, good.
Ready for orders.
You're not really blocking me because we're going after Budapest, Hungary, and we'll give it to the Austrians once.
Get ready. Onwards.
Once we get it, you gotta go around. Good. Hopefully it isn't too well defended.
In position.
That's good, and of course we've given over much of the territory to the... No, we haven't yet. Okay. We're going to now. Thought we had. Let's see if we can... No.
Settlement under siege.
Let's see if they'll just surrender.
Siege is
And we're
broken.
going to peacefully occupy Königsberg. Yeah. Okay, so yeah. Now we're going to help our friends, the Prussians, out, I think, now. Yeah, it looks like a good time. Okay. Prussia. They're down at just one province currently, so let's open negotiations. And let's go to regions. East Prussia, yes. Brandenburg, yes. And there's also West Prussia here somewhere. West Prussia, why it's there, I don't know. I mean, why it's there on the list, I don't know. Okay, yeah, that will... Okay, so they've got this. They're already trading. And we're basically at war with everyone we're not trading with there. Let's see, Batavian Republic, we're still at war. Italy. Can we, press trade agreement. Good, now we're trading with Italy, so that's a positive thing. Trade is what's keeping us funded at these very high levels. That is good. Okay.
Yes, my lord.
Let's retreat back up to here.
Immediately.
Maybe we should have just struck with them that way.
Any further orders?
Okay, Wellington, just Wellington. You get to come over.
Not possible, sir.
Come over there, because I want you to be
Sir,
recruiting them up, and I think
Your Majesty.
having you as a proper general. Yeah, now they'll be recruiting back up. And,
Yes.
which maybe I should have joined them at first. Let's move you into there. That was probably a mistake. Should have just joined them here. Okay. There we go. Now they'll recruit to better strength and condition. Yay. And I hope these guys are
Your humble.
recruiting up good as well. Now down here.
Your orders, Your Majesty. Forward! Up! Anything more?
Let's move retreat back to the bridge to see if they attack
Forward!
or counterattack or
Any
something.
further orders?
And here we got these guys. Let's see what we can do about that.
Lord! We shall win.
Okay. I'm gonna let the computer handle this one because it says we're doing so well. I'd probably mess that up.
Victory! Make ready! March! Your Majesty,
Okay, and then we'll move here
forwards for crown and country!
and get ready to smash them again, hopefully. And up here are sailing ships.
Fleet ready!
Again, we're going to let them handle it because,
Huzzah!
oh wow, that sure is a beating on us. Not saying I would have done any better, I've done sort of badly, but that was a big ship. So they're sunk, and our ships are going to go home to get repaired. Yay!
Ready! Set sail!
Very good. Now this fleet here I think is all repaired. So let's come back down here.
Aye, aye, Captain. Ship's orders.
They're still up there pirating.
Still shipshape. Yes, Your Majesty.
This fleet will come down and see what we can do about it.
Boys, heave away. Officer,
These guys, yeah, they're in very bad shape. So go to the port. And
reef sail.
let's repair. Those guys are the ones already important, just fine.
Orders, Captain.
Yeah, these 74s with a light escort with them. Yeah, come on down here.
Yes, Captain. Awaiting further orders.
They're recruiting after bumping into some of the Swiss.
Yes, sir.
These guys are all recruited up. Hmm.
Yes, sir.
I'm thinking we head over this way.
Troops, forward! Ready and awaiting orders. Any further orders? Forwards for crown and country! Ready and waiting for orders.
No, I want to build up before I start spending more. Let's build up some more cash. Done a few things to increase our trade. Including trading with the Prussians and the Italians. Prussians have a much bigger state now, so they have more trade. Levels likely.
Let me rest.
Ah, here they come. Well, Fusiliers of the line infantry, okay. We're gonna be smart and retreat.
Roll back!
Not the way I would have retreated.
Maneuvers complete.
Okay, Bonaparte, peace. No, I don't see a good reason to do so. I've thought about it, but... Spain, okay. Okay, Luddite movement, yes. Textile workers in Great Britain have begun protest at recent advances in technology, and I go yes because this is not a good thing, but that they feel are assault on their livelihoods, which they were, very much so. And the new wide frame automated looms do not require skilled labor, and as a result, many have lost their jobs and fallen further into abject poverty. Headed by the probably fictional character Ned Ludd, the Luddites have begun smashing mill machinery and setting fire to factories, as their leader is said to have done 30 years hence. Beginning in Nottinghamshire, the Luddite movement is spreading rapidly across the industrial Midlands and gradually moving towards Yorkshire and Lancashire. In addition to machine breaking, mill owners, magistrates, and merchants have received death threats, causing the government to take serious action against the protesters. The Luddites exist in such numbers that an army has been deployed to combat the situation, and the harsh sentences being handed down by the courts, including transportation to Australia, in some cases execution. Okay, well, say like some cases execution. Yeah, well, some of the stuff that they were doing, people died in. I don't know that, again, you got to look at case by case, and justice maybe, even though they did have a lot of courts, may not live up to modern day standards. But, coming in and smashing machinery, people tried to defend it, and fights broke out, and people were, I do believe some people were killed or died of their injuries eventually, days or weeks later. Not years, but, short time later. As well as seriously injured. And under the law, that's a death sentence. It wasn't just, because somebody protested somewhere they were. Now, a couple of things. A professor of mine who did look into this some really thinks that there is a slight continuation of Jacobite resistance in the Luddite movement. They definitely use some. Again, I'm not an expert on this, and he knew a little. He knew the Luddites more and knew the Jacobites a little bit, and he knew I studied the Jacobites at the time. This was back when I was in university, so we talked about it some. Some of their I don't know, sloganeering and chants and whatnot have a Jacobite ring to them, but they weren't trying to restore proper royal authority of the Jacobites or anything like that. It's more of the cultural sensibilities, shall we say, that the Jacobites often appealed to in traditional Britain and traditional rights that these people were looking at. So this is sort of a long simmering, ongoing, but transmuting of problems. If you look, including to the and sort of dying out with the Napoleonic era and the French Revolution, but if you look at the southeast of Britain, one of the areas that supposedly had, this was one of the areas that supposedly had a lot of Jacobite support, because people would, there was a lot of sort of covert and or well identifiable but deniable Jacobite symbology being used, and by that I mean things like people wearing a white rose. Are you a Jacobite, or are you just like white roses, or growing white roses in your garden, or something like this? It may have a political meaning, but it's the government or whoever wants to come by and say, oh, that's political. Go, no, I just like white roses. Or I just have a painting on the wall that has a white rose and two buds. The white rose for King James and the two buds for his two princes' sons. But without any other thing, nothing says King James the Third or, Bonnie Prince Charlie. This may be lost on, some of these names may be lost on many of you, but, they had none of that stuff because that'd be treason. But they had a sort of symbology that you're sort of in the know that this guy is probably of Jacobite sympathy. Now, people have, or researchers and academics have looked at some of this stuff, and they don't know really how strong the Jacobite feeling was, in the sense, because a lot of these same people are either directly or indirectly involved in the smuggling operations going on in Britain. So they think some of it is honest Jacobitism, and you find that throughout all of Britain. So, and if you don't know, Jacobitism is support of the Stuart monarchy, not always Catholic. I know some people will put it, though, they sort of lose their throne because the king refuses to switch religions. But some of the later, including Bonnie Prince Charlie, officially converts to Anglicanism, the Church of England. But it's not just that they're, not always that they're Catholics, but it's, various appeals. In Scotland, it's, like we were talking earlier, nationalistic in many ways. In Ireland, it's sort of nationalism and Catholicism, which is very strong appeal of for the Jacobites in there. But in Britain, it's various mixes, and often, especially like we were looking at the Luddites, looking back at what was the good old days. They may have not been the good old days, great grandpa's day, but they seem like the good old days. They maybe today it's better than it was back then, but they only hear about the good stuff, shall we say, of the good old days, and looking back at the Stuarts as that. There's some of that. Plus, there's also two other factors, I think. One they definitely think, and one of them I'm sort of adding to it. One is that since they are organized lawbreakers against authority, smuggling and not paying, most of the smuggling isn't like we see in America today where you're smuggling in drugs or some other illegal merchandise. Their smuggling was just smuggling in stuff that was, at least in peacetime, perfectly legal to bring in, but highly taxed. In times of war, they would be bringing in French wines and such from occupied territories. So they were spending gold, silver, maybe just English pound notes, but they were spending money, real good money, for French goods that the French government very much may need that money, and a percentage of it ends up in the French government pockets, but generally just helping their economy continue, even whether during the French Revolution or earlier, when, I don't know, because again I'm speaking to Americans as well as speaking to, Romanians who may not know this part of history well. But, the American War of Independence, the American Revolution, you get both France and Spain involved in it. And yes, the Americans hear about, Rochambeau's fleet and trapping Cornwallis in Yorktown and, sort of ending the last real battle, big battle. There's skirmishes going on after that, but ending the main thrust of the American Revolution. But the main fighting between France and Britain, as well as Spain and Britain, is after that point. It's a Franco-Spanish siege of Gibraltar continues almost for like a year. Massive siege that the only way and I've talked why Gibraltar should not be allowed to be besieged, because it's sort of functionally an island that the British were able to maintain sea contact, sometimes very perilous. They're hardly, getting just a few ships through kind of thing, sort of like a Malta siege. But a huge ongoing siege with various, not just troops just sitting in sort of, trenches and, occasionally waving at each other and occasionally shooting cannon at each other. They tried amphibious landings on Gibraltar and other things that didn't work out. So there was a lot going on there. But there was the Battle of the Saints down in the Caribbean, because I think it's called that because it's, near St. Lucius, St. Thomas, whatever, forget what islands, but the various saintly named islands down there that happened. So there's some major war going on after the war, basically, not quite the peace and the, acknowledging, not granting, but acknowledging independence of America. But, it's all but done, and the Americans are like, okay, yeah, we've won, we've won, so we're going to stop really shooting at each other, basically up until more or less the end. The British hold out in New York City, but have evacuated everywhere else in what becomes America. And so, no one wants, on either side, wants to continue dying for what that a war is for them functionally over. And once that's over, the Americans are like, oh yeah, okay, you Europeans, you want to keep fighting the British, fine, go ahead. We're done. You can settle for peace too. We don't, we're all happy now. But like I say, this was, a major ongoing war. And so you aren't allowed to trade with the enemy, but all of the English gentlemen want to continue getting their French wines, spices from Latin America, South America. They're coming through Spain and other things. So there's a lot of smuggling going on, and so you are going against the state, and instead of, it's sort of a, we're doing this because we're Jacobites. Whether they really cared who the king on the throne was, I don't know, and they may switch their allegiance once, if the Stuarts got in power, once they started taxing the imports. Now, of course, the Stuarts were always more friendly with the French, so there might not be as heavy taxes on French goods. And the smugglers, I don't know, do they become traders? People that ship goods back and forth? Or do they just go out of business? Yeah, I don't know either. But the other reason I think they also down in the southeast is sort of the wild southeast, or sort of like the Wild West down there in Britain at this time in many ways, is that their continued contact with Bourbon France and Bourbon Spanish possessions, as well as Austrian possessions up here, that are two things. One, they're generally emotionally and religiously, and whenever they want to stir up trouble with Britain, they got the Stuarts there as, we're not invading to conquer Britain and for France, we're invading to put the Stuarts back on the throne. Yeah, that's it. And because they sort of kind of know that France is, Napoleon might have thought he could have, and maybe if he had gotten his big army, could have, created a puppet state out of Britain. But most, France, Spain, whatever, they think they might be able to get colonies, might be able to shut down British trade, might be able to do a lot of things, but they know they're not going to by this point, especially at a post-Elizabethan world, after the sinking of the Armada. They really know that they're not going to be turning England into a puppet state, or maybe briefly a puppet state, but not a puppet state or a direct occupied parts of their territory, but they're looking to install a more friendly government, one that is naturally more friendly, and so that there very well may be big French army landing, smashing the British army that is opposing it, and then, okay, now everybody, the Jacobites are on the throne, we'll leave now. And that's basically what I think would have happened. So that these people wanting to have good relations with these Catholic powers, if they express or show some Jacobite sympathy, they would be get much more positive reception from the government officials, because they're often bypassing French customs too that may have import or export taxes on some of these things. But the French know, even in peacetime, that the French government knows that there's a lot of money to be made, and you're not going to get as much wine or other things or Dutch lace or whatever sold into England if you're taxing it over much. So they don't ever have the level of hunting down smugglers. And this also is that, these smugglers could be smuggling in English spies, and were. Everybody knew some of them were. But if they were supposedly Jacobites, they're friendly up to this side. Additionally, we also know, and I don't know this comes up in a lot of their researches, and it's been years since I've looked at this. With the coming of the, both, William and Mary's, and Mary dies and William continues on as king, but when he comes in, a bunch of the Jacobites have to flee. Then he dies without any heirs that are English crown heirs. Some heir for the Dutch throne, but nobody for the English one. So marries his wife's and his cousin, because William III of England, the stadtholder of the House of Orange in the Netherlands, is a Stuart, and he marries his cousin Mary Stuart, the daughter of the king. So, and although Mary does have some children, I think, but none of them make it to adulthood. I don't quite quote me on all that, but there's no heir there. Then her sister, Mary's sister, Anne, who has been married to the King of Denmark, comes back. Now, the King of Denmark comes over, but he's a non-entity in Britain. She's reigning. She has some children by her husband. I think one of them makes it to like 18 or 19 years old before he dies. And it's the lack of health care, and bad food and other sorts of things that these children are dying. It's not, one of the main princes, maybe even Prince Henry, the son of King James I, is, swimming in the Thames River, outside of London, and, catches cholera or something, and shouldn't have been swimming in that river because it's polluted filth, but they don't know that, and they don't know how to cure it, that they could have cured it in a modern sense. So you get the best medical treatment possible on the planet that they can access. And I say that because maybe there's something better in China, but they can't access it. But the best in Britain is probably in the leading medical science. He dies, and because they also do weird hokey kind of stuff to try to cure it, he dies. So so even the elites are dying of this bad condition. So Anne's over there. And there has to be some fleeing, but once Anne dies without any issue, then you got the Hanoverians coming in, and that's sort of the Germans. They're also descended from the Stuarts, but even more people, because of some of the fightings, have to flee. Now, we all know, and we're talking about this with the trade, I'm sort of setting you up and what's going on, all this stuff, is there's a, Britain is known for its trade, and it has trade expertise. It comes at all levels, and I would say, sort of at a sort of a fundamental element of it, you can look at as culture, and not culture so much. I mean, it's a factor in there. Not so much culture as in what you eat. Like in America, we think of like, oh, Mexican food or something, but that's part of culture, or music or whatever. That's all an element of it. But it's just this sort of trading sense that Britain has that wasn't necessarily found in large numbers and settings in other parts of the world. So a bunch of these exiles that have to leave, some because they're Catholic, some just because they chose the wrong side, and sometimes they chose the wrong side when there's an uprising or conflict. They think their side's going to win. It doesn't, so they flee. Others just sort of like, oh, I can't live here under this wrong monarchy. I'm going to go, voluntarily go into exile. So there's a bunch of Jacobites that are trading personalities, I guess, and they go set up from Sweden down to Spain, all along, this coastline here, various houses and various things that are English trading houses that continue to be rather English, at least in that sort of upper element of the trade, not like the workers that are moving the barrels of goods in and out of the business, but are very much this network of Jacobite English trading houses that are set up on the continent, more or less along the Atlantic coast, and are very much involved with trading from whatever host country, like Sweden or Norway or the Netherlands, which were also great traders as well, but France and Spain and down into Portugal, I think some. And so all these trading expertise that are working in their new adopted countries that are exploiting trading networks with contacts in England, and so that it's all very tenuous, because once if you're known to be in too much contact, not just with a foreign power, but with a exiled traitorous power, but still, so these are really boons to these countries, these exiles. But I do believe, I don't have evidence of this, because this is just purely my surmising, is because people don't keep records of treason. These smugglers, I'm talking about. But I believe, because I do know that there were, and I don't right now, can't name any out of memory, but I do know in around here, this part of the world, there are Jacobite, so in essence, Scottish/English trading houses are set up in the ports, and I cannot but imagine that these same people are dealing with the smugglers as well. So they're buying goods on the continent, Dutch lace, French wines, spices and other things coming from the Spanish colonies coming into Europe, and buying it and then selling it to smugglers that would then smuggle it into Britain. And we do have some significant evidence that smuggler John Smith isn't rich enough to go buy a very fast chaise Marie, is what they sort of called them, at least in English, the sort of fast luggers, small sailing ships that were built for racing speed, but had some cargo. Instead of slow-moving cargo ships, they were fast to outrun the revenuers. So John Smith doesn't have the money to buy it. one of these things. And somebody who has some money doesn't want to go risk his life or going to jail or other things smuggling. So we know that there are effectively sort of joint stock company type situations in which multiple investors would invest in a smuggling vessel because they know that, well, hey, buying that smuggling vessel, if it can make 4 trips across the channel or something, it pays for itself, and the 6th or 7th trip, they're now in a bit of profit. So sure, the smuggling captain, sort of the official local owner of the boat, that he would tell, oh yeah, and they'd often pretend to be fishing boats and other things like that. Oh yeah, I'm the owner of this. Well, the real owners are people in Britain, also, but also people in France, and I believe some of these exiled houses were. So that own percentages of it. So instead of, oh, the boat's taken, I've lost all my money. Oh, the boat's taken, I've lost 10% of my money that I've invested in it because I've invested in a percent of 10 boats. So gambling on the whole, they make a profit on it. The smuggler who is almost taken but lets his boat be captured and gets away, he goes to his backers, yeah, but I made 8 or 9 trips before I got caught, and hey, they're going to auction off the boat next week. Why don't you buy it back and then sell it to me for a penny or whatever they would do, So, get my boat back for me. And that's what they would, do. So I just believe, I can't say that I have any evidence for, that these Jacobite trading houses were also, and so since these people, to get good dealings with these Jacobite trading houses, they would use Jacobite symbology, language, and other things. So I think there was all these motivations going on into this. Now, I know this is a lot about Luddites, but I don't often get to talk as much about some of the stuff on this thing. But also, another thing is, and I know I've called myself this in the terms, I do have a smartphone now. I barely know how to text on it. I've texted on it or read texts on it 5 or 6 times now. But it's just sort of a fancy cell phone that I've hardly used. Often people are called Luddites or call themselves Luddites, or people who are not up or trying to be up on all the latest technology. And so also you should be aware of that term. So if you hear somebody, oh, he's a Luddite, or oh, I'm a Luddite, doesn't mean that they are supportive of going around and breaking. Primarily they were looms, for making cloth, but other sorts of machinery in the early 19th century. It's just that they're not up on, or trying to be up on, all the latest tech gizmos of the day. And that's where the term comes from. And that's also an important lesson to know. And we've got some more recruits and stuff. Great. Okay. Good. Well, I think with all that, we're going to end the episode here. I want to thank you for watching. Thanks for liking. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And, of course, post your comments, questions, suggestions, corrections, because I'm sure I got something wrong. I'm sure I have. Love to hear from you. See you next time for more Historical Gaming.